welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. I'm a ninth grade English teacher and author, and I'm going to be talking to another educator and author on today's show. We're going to be talking to Paul Semendinger, who has been a guest previously. He's going to be talking about his new book out from New Mexico publisher Artemisia Publishing, 365.2, Going the Distance, A Runner's Journey. Paul, go ahead and introduce yourself.
This is great. Thank you so much for having me again. This is Paul Semendinger, and I'm an author, and I wrote this wonderful book, 365.2, Going the Distance, which is a number of different things at the same time. Number one, I hope it's a motivational book for other people. I set this goal many, many years ago that I was going to run every single day for a year. That's where the 365 comes from. And I tried it a few times. I failed a few times. And in 2022, I said, I'm just going to do it. I have to do it. It's one of those dumb things that'll bug me forever unless I get it done and do it. And I did. And the book is the story of how I ran every day for a year. But it's also, again, I think running is a metaphor in the book for anyone setting their own goals to find ways to achieve them, even though it gets hard and difficult and challenging and becomes a nuisance at times. I think when we set goals and we work to achieve them, even when we fail, but again, eventually when we do succeed in making them, we live richer lives and we find out that we can do more things than we ever thought possible. And that's what this book really is all about.
Thank you for that. There are a couple things that really stood out to me with this one for several reasons that we'll get into as we talk. But one of the first things, and I'm glad you pointed out that this is not for runners, how to run, how to create a running habit, or anything like that. It is
exactly
the story of you working through this goal and some of the problems you encountered, the mental, emotional, physical struggles that you had to overcome in order to reach this goal of running every day for an entire year. So tell us a little bit about your first couple of attempts at this, why they didn't work, and what your mindset was going into this attempt.
Sure. You know, we get these silly things in our head, and I don't know if they're really truly silly. I mean, running every day for a year is silly in one sense. On the other sense, having the focus and the ability and the perseverance to do it isn't silly. And again, I think with running being a metaphor, this idea that if we set goals and we figure out how to achieve them, then it's not silly. The goal itself might be, but the actual getting to the task isn't necessarily. So I had this idea a number of years ago, probably for decades, like, wouldn't it be something if I could run every day for a year? And I tried a few times. One time I made it, I think, to like January 3rd or January 4th. And I said, this is just ridiculous. And then a couple of years before I succeeded, I made it into February. And I was really proud of myself for that. And I guess I get a little bit of a pat on the back for making it that far. But the entire time, that second time when I actually made it to February, the entire time I hated it and I was angry about it and I didn't want to do it. And I tried to find the easiest way out. And I think sometimes when we find the easiest way out, we realize we're really not doing what we should or could. And eventually the truth that it wasn't really a worthwhile endeavor at that time came to pass, and I quit. And this time around, every year on January 1st, I say, oh, this might be the year I do it. And most years I never even tried. And those first couple that I failed, I said, well, at least I'll try, but I didn't make it. And so every year on January 1st, I'd say, maybe this is the year, maybe this is the year. And I really got tired of saying, maybe this is the year. I said, this has to be the year. And so that's the year I did it, 2022.
What you mentioned, deciding this has to be the year rather than maybe. I think that's such an important difference. And it's something that teaching over this last year, I taught ninth graders, and it was interesting to see the range of motivation and how many gave up so quickly. The second they encountered trouble, missed one assessment and it tanked their grade. We have this 80-20 system where assessments are worth 80% and practice work is only worth 20%. So missing or bombing one assessment or test can really have a big impact on your grade. And I'm not particularly a fan of that system, but it's not up to me. I just have to work within the system. And so many of those kids would be, trucking along, getting practice work in, even if it wasn't great, holding getting some sort of steady grade. And then they'd do poorly on one assessment. And it was like, that's it. I've already failed. I'm done. I can't do this. And it was so hard to try to keep them from just completely checking out. With some of them, like, 3-4 weeks into the semester, where you're like, it is way too early to give up. Come on, you got to keep trying.
Absolutely. I'm not a big fan of this idea that you're working under.
Yeah, it's a challenge. But yeah, so that was something that struck me right off the bat, you talking about, these first couple of attempts. And sometimes, we have that idea, I'm going to do this. And then, the motivation or the energy or whatever it is kind of fizzles fairly quickly. But you kind of had a point where this is kind of coming out of COVID and schools going back to semi-normal. So you had a lot going on over this year. And to have that moment where you said, no, this has to be the year I'm going to do this, even despite everything else going on, a decision like that has a lot of weight and meaning behind it. And I wanted to ask you about why you felt like this year's 2022 had to be the year that you were going to complete this. What was behind that strength and motivation this time?
One of the ideas was I was just not getting any younger. I'm 55 now. I'll be 56 in a little over a month. And I was 53 at the time. And as you get older, I think I'm in pretty good shape. I'm still running marathons and doing all that. But as you get older, your body doesn't necessarily respond as well day to day. And I just started to say, if I don't do it at 53, it's just going to be harder next year. And as I said earlier, part of it was I got tired of saying I'd like to accomplish this and then not doing it. At some point, I said, I'm going to have to do it, or I'm going to have to give it every ounce of my being to try and fail. And I have no problem failing. The book could have been a book about not making it, and that would have been fine. I don't know if you've ever read the book A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. In essence, that's sort of where that book goes. His big goal he doesn't necessarily achieve, but the book itself is phenomenal, even though what he was looking to do doesn't necessarily come to fruition. But like I said, the one year I tried and my heart wasn't in it. So I was doing it, but it was just trying to find the easiest way out. And that wasn't the right way. So this time I said, I'm going to do it. And I did. But in the back of my mind, if I didn't, at least I knew I was giving it everything I had. My heart was in there. My spirit was in there. My focus was there. And I guess because of that, I was able to succeed as well.
I think that's an important lesson as well, that we're all going to face failure lots and lots of times in our life. But even when you don't achieve a goal, if you know you put in your full effort, you gave it everything you had, you got the best result you possibly could have in the situation, then it's a different type of success than maybe what you started out looking for, but it's still there. You still learned a lot. You still persevered through it. And that was something too, like, I've learned so much over this first year of public school teaching. It was crazy. It was a challenge, but definitely taught me a lot. I had several students who, over semester one, just completely bombed and checked out and wouldn't even try at one point. And they came into the second semester still struggling. This is not, their strongest area in life for several of these, but they were determined not to have to do credit recovery to make up those credits that they lost. And I'd had several at the end of the year who their goal was to get a 60. Mm. And, it's like, yeah, that's a different goal than a lot of the other students. But for them, they actually really worked hard to their abilities. They came in and reassessed. They put in the time. A lot of it was at the end of the semester when they're like, oh, shoot. But they came through. They tried to put in as much effort as they could. And I think almost all of them in that group who were really kind of on the bubble got up to somewhere between 60 and 65. I think I had one who just couldn't get it together at the end and make it through. But it was interesting to see how hard some of those kids worked just to get to passing. And that was kind of where they felt like that's the most I can do right now. And I know a lot of them have a lot of personal things and family issues and a lot of other things that are competing for their attention and mental energy right now. And I definitely have sympathy for that. But it was interesting to see, those kids who are like, why did I lose 1 point on this assignment? They want the 100% on everything. And these other kids that were giving it their all just to try to pass the class, like, they still reached their goal. And
right, they made it.
I was proud of them.
And I agree. And I don't know exactly the system you're working in, but if the system is designed to engender failure and like 80% of your grade is this assessment or whatever, and you don't do well on that one thing, that can be demoralizing. And the fact that they had the ability to bounce back after facing all that adversity and said, you know what, I can't get a 90 or an 80, maybe not even a 70, but I'm going to do everything I can to pass. And in light of that, they did. There's something noble and great about that.
I'm hoping that taught them some skills that they can take into next year and maybe get up to a 70 or, do a little better.
Right. Well, you learn about yourself. When you fail, you learn all about yourself. And I think I wrote in the book early on, I'm an expert in failure. I've failed at so many different things. It's not even funny. But when we fail, we learn how to succeed. And that's part of the process. So hopefully your students learned that as well.
That is my hope. And I liked that you included at the end of the book, you had a kind of a list of reflections on some of the lessons that you learned through this whole process. And I wanted to ask, what were some of the lessons that you felt like were the biggest takeaways for you?
Wow, there's so many.
Hard question, sorry.
Some simple things. Yeah, it's a great question. I wrote this. I learned that even as a man in his mid-50s, that I can still accomplish difficult physical tasks. I'm around a lot of people my age, and a lot of people, when they hit a certain number, an age, they use that number to define themselves. And they say, like, well, I guess I can't do this anymore because I'm a certain age, or I shouldn't do this anymore because I'm a certain age. And, age is just a number. And I run the New York City Marathon every year, and it's in the book. But before the race, I help officiate a religious service at the start. And there's a man who is in his 90s that has run over 100 marathons, who comes every year. And he pretty much walks the whole thing at this point. But he goes out there and he does it. He doesn't say, I'm a certain age and so I can't run a marathon or can't participate in a marathon anymore. I can keep doing it. I also wrote, I learned there might not be a worse feeling in the world than quitting. As the days became weeks and the weeks became months, and as winter turned to spring and spring became summer, I knew I had to complete the task. I wouldn't let anything short of an injury or an unexpected life disaster get in the way of finishing. And again, things can get in the way of us completing a task. Quitting wasn't going to be one of those things that got in my way. I always look at this and say, I quit. I didn't want to be the person who quit because I just didn't want to do it anymore. I wanted to be able to find something deep inside myself. And I think that's something else. When we're younger, we have goals and we have, I have to do this because then I can get a better job. And I want to be a great teacher, and maybe I'll then be a vice principal, and then I'll be a principal and whatever else. I want to get my doctorate, so I have a high degree, and maybe that helped me become a principal, or I want to become a daddy and I just became a grandpa. And you have some of these goals, but especially when you're younger, as you get older, sometimes you just I have nothing else to look forward to. And I want to make sure that I always have things to look forward to. And I don't want to look back and say, I couldn't do it because I just didn't have the focus. If something gets in the way, it gets in the way and it prevents me from doing it. But it's not going to be me that prevents me from accomplishing those things I need to do.
You had to adapt in several ways throughout this. You dealt with some injuries, some family members who got ill, all the stress that you were going through with trying to bring your school community back together after COVID. Talk a little bit about how you overcame some of those challenges that you could have easily said, this is too much. I need to take a break from running. I'm going to focus on work or family or, whatever it was, some of those things that came up. How did you adapt and find that balance to be able to continue on?
I think I have a way to compartmentalize. Work is work. And I wrote in there, when I worked, I retired during that year. That's part of what the story is. But when I worked, I was 24/7. I gave the parents, I was a principal, my phone number. They all many still do, had my phone number. And I answered emails 24/7 a day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I was fully invested in my school because that was my job. And I was responsible for all those teachers and all those kids and all those families and bringing it all back. But within that, I can compartmentalize. Like, I have to do those things, and I also have to keep running, find the time, make it happen. Obviously, in order to do that, sometimes it meant I didn't get enough sleep. I didn't want to have an excuse. Oh, I could have done it. So many times people say, well, it's a busy time of year. Teachers say that all the time. Oh, it's very busy. The school year's just starting. It's very busy. Well, it's the holidays. It's a very busy time. Well, it's just after the holidays. It's a very busy time. Well, the school year's ending. It's a very busy time. Well, report cards are due. It's a very busy time. Like, we always have these built-in excuses, and I just didn't want to have to rely on a built-in excuse or something outside of myself that was going to say, you're not going to do it. If something big outside of myself happened, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But the things that happened, I retired. I brought my school back from COVID to regular school, which was very successful. We had some family issues, some health issues that required me to change my daily living. But even within those things, none of those things were as big enough to prevent me from finding a half an hour to an hour in a day, whether, again, waking up early, going to bed late, that got in the way of me making sure I was able to check each day off on the calendar.
Well, and I have to say, one of the other things that I feel like for me was just really great timing in reading this is, like you were saying, teachers saying, oh, grades are due, it's the holidays, blah, blah, blah. This last year was, I just felt like so chaotic, my first year teaching.
Well, that's a big year, yes.
And there was such a huge learning curve, and especially dealing with all the behavior issues and everything, I would just come home exhausted. Especially the first semester, just demoralized most of the time trying to get a handle on the behavior in my classroom. And it got to where I was feeling like, I cannot get any writing done. I'm too wiped out. I'm too busy with lesson planning. I've got this and that and the other. My daughter graduated this year, so there was all of that added in and everything, that it was just like, I got almost no writing done during the school year. And I hadn't been writing a lot the previous couple of years as well. Just a lot of big life changes, divorce, moved, changed jobs twice, which I wasn't expecting to do. And so I keep telling myself, I want to get back into writing. I need to get back into writing. I miss it. And I just couldn't find the time because I wasn't making the time. And my boyfriend, Chris, was really encouraging me, and we were talking about, how to approach this summer. This is the first time since I went back to work after my kids got older, that I've had this amount of time to catch up on things, to do personal stuff. And we were talking, and he's like, set a schedule. Figure out when you're going to do it. Make sure you put that time in if that's the priority. And so that was something that I was like, okay, this summer, I'm going to get a first draft of something. And even the first week, last week, of being like, okay, I'm going to spend 30 minutes to an hour every day writing, or at least 5 days a week, because I'm often just not home enough on the weekends. We're out hiking and doing whatever. So it was like, okay, I'm going to get in. And first it's like, all right, in the morning, getting it done. And then after dinner, then maybe back to the morning. Then it's like 11 o'clock at night before I'm like, oh yeah, I need to get some writing in. And reading your book, like you said, you're hoping that it's inspirational. And it really was helping me because I was noticing with myself, like I'm making excuses. And I made a lot of excuses over the year where there were nights that I had the energy and the time and I chose to, watch a show or sometimes catch up on baseball games that I hadn't been able to watch all week.
Sure.
Which is a good activity. It really made me stop and think like how many of those opportunities I had missed because I was letting those excuses get to me and I wasn't having any accountability for myself on sitting down and getting writing done. And that was still something I was struggling with last week. And I don't really have like an active writers writing group. I run a local writers group, but it's more of like we have a topic each month. It's more support rather than like accountability for writing for each other. So I decided I was going to start recording my progress in the form of like a podcast, what I accomplished each day, what my word count was. And it was like, it's going to be really a sad episode if I finish a week and have to be like, well, this episode's about 15 seconds long because I didn't get anything done this week.
That's a great idea. We
And
have to find those external ways to motivate ourselves,
yeah,
right? I keep a
absolutely.
running calendar. I give myself little stars every time I exercise.
I liked
And then the
that.
month fills up with the stars, right?
Well, I loved your process for tracking that. And that was one of the things that made me think, like, I need something where I'm forcing myself to have some accountability. That was something that was like, oh, I'll do it this weekend. I'll have some extra time here and there. And so I thought that that was a really great part of it. That even though this isn't like how to run for a year or how to build a writing habit, I noticed how much you track and hold yourself accountable. And I think that that is great for any type of goal that you're trying to reach, to find that method that works for an individual on how you're going to be accountable and how you're going to track yourself and help motivate yourself on coming through with something. And this is something you said you've been doing for decades, right?
Yes. Yeah, I hold myself accountable. Otherwise, as you say, the days escape, right? One of the hardest things to overcome is this idea, most dangerous words is tomorrow, right? I'll do it
Mm-hmm.
tomorrow. And then tomorrow becomes, well, I could do it tomorrow. Tomorrow's another day. And tomorrow becomes a week, and the week becomes next month. And, well, January will be a good time to start. September 9th will be a good time to start. And it just keeps getting away from us. I tried to do things that way, and I said, it doesn't work. So I have to hold myself accountable by keeping track. And it's somewhat OCD type of process. Like, it's a little bit obsessive compulsive, but it works.
Well, and I think today, I mean, whatever somebody's trying to accomplish, there is most likely an app for that.
Yeah, that is true.
Something to
No
help
doubt.
you, whether it's, food or daily check-ins on something or, whatever it is. I know there's some for writing too that I haven't attempted yet. But I think that that's an interesting thing, that so many of us do need that level of accountability to really kind of keep ourselves going. And it's interesting to see how sometimes if we don't have a community who's involved in the same thing that pushes that, it is really hard to do that on your own sometimes. And I did find that really helpful and inspirational in your book to see you can build a system to help you get whatever the goal is that you're using, and it doesn't have to look like anyone else's. But I thought that that was a really great aspect of what you shared as far as your process to help give people ideas on how they might be able to do that better in their goals.
Exactly. Thank you. I appreciate that it helped you and you found it valuable. Again, you talked about being alone. Most of my runs were alone. I have people I run with, but people have busy lives. And I talk about some of the times when some people were able to run with me, and my kids and some of my friends, but those were few and far between. And again, it's just like I have to be accountable to myself. And in the end, that's who we have to be accountable for, right? And to God, of course, but God doesn't care if you run every day. He wants you to live a good life. But so you have to you have to answer to him for that. But in order to run every day, or to write every day, or to paint every day, or to eat right, whatever the goal is, you need to find a way to hold yourself to that goal. And that doesn't mean that you can't take it. I mean, I didn't take a day off when I did this, but I haven't run every day ever since. I've run a lot since, but I don't run every day anymore. I just needed to do it once. So that doesn't mean you don't have a day where you don't write. Like, oh, well, I failed. I didn't write today. No. I'm going to write 5 days a week this week. And if you only do 4, at least you held yourself accountable and you said, I did 4. So you pat yourself on the back. You said, I did 4. That was pretty good. And next week I'll try to do a little better, or match 4 again. And we know that by keeping track, we can see the progress we make, and we can see where we've exceeded, and we can see where we need to dig a little deeper or find more time or do something differently to help accomplish whatever it is we're trying to do.
Well, and we are already to the point where we're almost out of time. But I did want to ask you about, you did bring up throughout the book how much your faith impacted just your effort and your overall worldview and how you approached this. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that and how those two things came together throughout this year for you.
Yeah, my faith is very strong. I'm not ordained, but I do speak often enough in churches, and I've been asked to come and do sermons and run church services. I just did one in a neighboring town a couple of weeks ago. I think my faith permeates the way I live my life. But the one thing I think what you're referring to here is I found a way to stay connected with God in my runs by finding a moment in every mile that I run to simply just say the Lord's Prayer. And when you do that, or when I did it, I can't say for anybody else, I really tried to focus on all the words of the Lord's Prayer. And without going through the whole thing, because I know we have a time limit, but the idea is that forgive other people. We want to be forgiven. Give thanks. Try to stay away from things that are bad and try to live the best life on earth that God wants us to live. And I found, and it sounds kind of trite or maybe it's silly, but it's absolutely 100% true, that when I get to that point, even if I'm having a bad run, when I get to that point in the mile and I'd say, oh, it's time for me to pray and just say a quick Lord's Prayer, those words always help propel me a little bit further. Like, okay, God's giving me a little push. Jesus is giving me a little push. And it absolutely helps. It strengthens my faith. It strengthens my connection with God. And I think it helped my running.
I think that's wonderful. Everybody has different aspects of their being and who they are and what they believe in that helps find those motivations. And I think with running, there's very meditative quality to it in a lot of ways. I miss that about running. I'm about 6 months out from surgery to repair my TPL, and I can't run anymore. I'm learning to mountain bike instead with Chris. So
that sounds awesome.
But that was something that I used to count when I ran, when I was having a particularly rough day or not able to really get into the run. I would count my steps, and it would just clear everything else out and focus me. And I thought that was interesting that you would say the Lord's Prayer at certain times and just use that as your way of centering yourself and your practice in those moments. And I think that's something that, whether someone has a different belief system or whatever, bringing in whatever is important to you into that process of trying to achieve those goals, I think can be really meaningful.
100%. What was fun was I actually mentioned that was my sermon at the New York City Marathon last November. And as I was running on the course, one of the people who was at the service saw me, and I said, oh, it's just about time for me to pray. He goes, I'm praying every mile like you do. And I said, it's just about time. And so as we were running the New York City Marathon, we were saying the Lord's Prayer together. It was kind of neat. It was very neat. I think I've helped other people incorporate that practice, the idea of finding time to connect during a run because of the words I shared. So that's very meaningful.
Paul, before we wrap up, I did want to ask you what you're working on currently and what we can look forward to in the future for you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm doing a couple of things. I'm writing a memoir with a person who was actively involved in the news business. I'm his co-writer, but the book I'm writing on my own, I'm actually writing a detailed account of the Battle of Gettysburg. And my goal, this is my goal, is texting some people who are doing some preliminary reads of the book, like, when do you think you can have it to me? Because I need to get it to the publisher by the end of June. The first draft of what's going to be a 3-volume set of biographies about people who fought at the Battle of Gettysburg. I'm not able to give much more detail than that, but it's something else. This has been a labor. Every book's hard to write, no doubt about it. The other book, though, it was very personal, and it was just which stories, how do I write it, and things like that. This has been a labor of research and digging deep and visiting the battlefield and going through primary sources and things like that. But it's a labor of love. I think it's going to be a really neat product, and I hope it's going to be, as I say, a 3-volume series. I hope volume 1 is out within the year.
Well, that sounds really interesting. I look forward to hearing more about that. Well,
yes, absolutely.
I wanted to remind our listeners that our guest today was Dr. Paul Semendinger, and the book is called 365.2, Going the Distance, A Runner's Journey. And Paul, where can people find you and the book online?
Wonderful. They can find me at www.drpaulsem.com. The book is available everywhere. It's available from Artemisia Publishing, apbooks.net. It's also on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Ask your independent bookseller to get it in if they don't have it already. And I'm also on Twitter at Dr. Paul R. Sem. And you can just type my name in. I bet you people can find me. And I hope people do. Reach out to me. I'd love to talk.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today, Paul. I really enjoyed it, as usual.
Oh, I did too. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can touch base again.